On a humid Florida evening in September 2019, a private Learjet 55 slowly descended toward the well-lit strip of Fort Lauderdale Executive Airport. It wasn't an unusual sight. This small airport saw dozens of private flights every day, many from the Caribbean and South America. But this flight, tail number YV-3441, arriving from Caracas, Venezuela, would soon trigger an international scandal. As the plane taxied to a stop, two men on board, both Venezuelan nationals, seemed calm, even cordial. They were used to flying under the radar. The pilot flashed forged documentation, and the passenger claimed they were in Florida on business. It was the kind of vague answer that made Customs and Border Protection agents raise an eyebrow. Agents began a routine inspection. They scanned the jet's passenger cabin, luggage compartments, and then, curiously, requested to access the aircraft's nose cone, a spot rarely checked unless there's a reason. What they found wasn't avionics equipment or repair tools. Under a carefully fitted metal panel, hidden behind layers of insulation, sat more than 230 pounds, over 100 kilograms, of pure gold bars, carefully arranged and wrapped to avoid detection by scanning systems. Street value? Nearly $5 million. The officers paused, then called for backup. That night, what began as a routine landing turned into one of the largest gold smuggling busts in recent U.S. aviation history. And as the investigation unfolded, it became clear, the two men on board were just the tip of a much larger, glittering iceberg. The two men arrested at Fort Lauderdale Executive Airport gave simple names: Pedro Gutierrez, the pilot, and Luis Figueroa, listed as a consultant. But their backstories unraveled into something far more complex. Pedro was no ordinary private jet pilot. In his mid-40s, he'd flown over 200 international charters in the past 3 years, mostly between Venezuela, Panama, and the U.S. His credentials seemed spotless, but dig deeper, and a pattern emerged: unusually short turnarounds, flights with minimal cargo on manifest, and no consistent employer. Luis, meanwhile, claimed he was in the U.S. to explore real estate opportunities. But when agents searched his bag, they found 3 unregistered phones, encrypted USB drives, and a set of ledgers filled with handwritten codes, some referencing gold purity levels, exchange rates, and what appeared to be initials linked to shipments. One notebook entry simply read: nose cone equals safe. 101.3 kilograms equals 24K. No X-ray. When cross-checked with Homeland Security data, Luis was flagged in 2 separate suspicious activity reports, SARS, by banks in Miami and Panama for wire transfers exceeding $1.2 million with no declared income source. What stunned investigators was how professional the whole setup was. The smuggling wasn't sloppy or improvised, it was engineered. The gold bars had been cast into specific dimensions to fit snugly into hidden compartments within the jet's nose section, surrounded by electromagnetic shielding to reduce X-ray visibility. Authorities now suspected this wasn't a one-off flight, it was part of a smuggling pipeline, possibly run by a cartel or rogue network in Venezuela using private jets to launder gold in exchange for US dollars. And the deeper they dug, the clearer it became: Pedro and Luis were just couriers in a high-stakes gold game stretching across borders, banks, and political silence. After detaining Pedro and Luis, Homeland Security and CBP agents moved the jet to a secure hangar. Forensic aviation techs suited up and began dismantling the front of the plane, focusing on the nose cone, where suspicions had first taken shape. Once the panels were off, the operation's sophistication was undeniable. Behind the avionics, tucked into a custom-made, insulated false compartment, were 29 gleaming gold bars, each about the size of a TV remote, wrapped in anti-static film and heat-resistant foil. The cavity had been precision-engineered, reinforced to withstand turbulence and go unnoticed during flight maintenance. Agents took careful measurements. The bars weighed in at a collective 101.3 kilograms, around 223 pounds, with nearly all marked 999.9, indicating 99.99% pure gold, the highest grade. The gold didn't appear to be mined or refined in the U.S., initial lab results hinted at Venezuelan metallurgy, which was significant. In Venezuela, gold smuggling has exploded in recent years due to crippling U.S. sanctions and economic collapse. With state refineries faltering and oversight in chaos, many gold shipments are diverted through illegal mines, often run by corrupt officials or criminal syndicates like the Tren de Aragua. The U.S. Department of Treasury had already blacklisted several gold-related entities in Venezuela for ties to narco-trafficking and money laundering. Back at the hangar, one customs agent remarked, "This isn't just some rich guys stashing bullion. This is strategic. This is organized." A deeper investigation into the jet's flight logs showed at least 6 similar flights from Caracas in the past year, all piloted by Pedro, each landing at different small U.S. airports. Had any of them carried gold too? That question sent shockwaves through federal agencies. And the next stage of the case would uncover connections far beyond 2 men and a jet. As investigators combed through flight manifests, maintenance logs, and customs records, a larger pattern began to emerge. Pedro Gutierrez's Learjet had landed in at least 4 different U.S. states over the past 11 months: Texas, Georgia, Florida, and New Jersey. In each case, the aircraft avoided major international hubs, opting instead for low-traffic executive airports, the kind where customs checks were sporadic and often less rigorous. The jet's home base was listed as Simón Bolívar International Airport in Caracas, but further inquiry revealed it had no official hangar there. Instead, it frequently launched from military-controlled airstrips in southern Venezuela, near gold-rich regions like Bolívar State, home to some of the most lawless and cartel-run mining operations in Latin America. Here's what stunned U.S. officials most: the Venezuelan government had no record of any gold export declarations matching the volume found in Florida. In other words, this was pure black market bullion, likely mined with forced labor, smuggled through unofficial borders, and flown out under the radar. A joint report between U.S. Customs and the DEA soon identified at least 3 similar jets using the same routes. All were owned by shell companies registered in Panama, Aruba, and the British Virgin Islands, notorious havens for laundering dirty assets. But the most damning lead came from an intercepted WhatsApp chat, retrieved from Luis Figueroa's encrypted phone. The message was short. FTL final drop. Next batch ready. Barquisimeto run in 10 days. Use girl. FTL was believed to mean Fort Lauderdale. Barquisimeto is a city near another smuggling route. And use girl raised alarm bells. Authorities feared a female courier, possibly coerced or complicit, was being prepped for the next gold run. This one message flipped the case from financial crime into something more urgent. Could a human trafficking element be in play? Now, federal agents weren't just looking for gold, As the physical investigation turned digital, forensic analysts at the Department of Homeland Security dug into Luis Figueroa's seized electronics. The ledgers, USB drives, and encrypted messages painted a financial portrait that was as intricate as it was suspicious. Several offshore accounts were traced to Panama, Malta, and Hong Kong, none directly linked to Luis or Pedro, but all receiving structured wire transfers in the $48,000 to $99,000 range, just below the $100,000 threshold that typically flags high-risk transactions in global banking systems. Over the past 18 months, more than $8.6 million USD had flowed through these channels. Who was paying them? One name stood out: Jairo El Oro Monteverde, a known gold baron with alleged ties to the Tren de Aragua, Venezuela's largest transnational criminal organization. Monteverde had been under DEA scrutiny since 2017 for funding illegal mining operations and smuggling raw gold through Aruba, Guyana, and even Dominican Republic. The money, investigators found, followed a circular route. Gold was purchased in Venezuela, often extracted from mines controlled by criminal gangs. Hawala-style agents moved large sums in cash to Dubai or Panama. Funds were routed through shell corporations tied to fake tech consultancies. Proceeds ended up in U.S. real estate, crypto wallets, and high-end watches, purchased through intermediaries. In Miami alone, Monteverde's network had funneled money into 2 strip malls, a car dealership, and a warehouse listed as a shipping logistics firm. None were operating as legitimate businesses. Meanwhile, Pedro's flight records were matched with a spike in bullion sales in South Florida, often through small jewelers who offered no questions, no receipts, and no identification checks. Several of these jewelers have since been subpoenaed for alleged violations of the Bank Secrecy Act. This wasn't just gold smuggling, it was international money laundering. The Fort Lauderdale bust didn't stay local for long. Within 48 hours of Pedro and Luis's arrests, Interpol issued alerts to aviation authorities in Panama, Aruba, Curaçao, and the Dominican Republic, all frequent stops in suspected gold smuggling circuits. Venezuelan dissidents, long vocal about their country's illegal mining economy, began surfacing new allegations that military-run airstrips were routinely rented out to gold couriers for flights carrying undocumented bars to Central America and the U.S. News of the arrest hit Latin American and U.S. headlines fast. Venezuela's state media, however, denied any wrongdoing, calling the flight a private matter and accusing the U.S. of economic warfare and smear campaigns. But internally, panic was setting in. A classified memo leaked days later showed that Venezuelan military officials were investigating airport ground crews for possible collaboration with cartels. In the U.S., the ripple effects were more visible and more strategic. The Department of Justice opened a multi-agency task force to investigate illicit transnational precious metal flows. The DEA and Treasury added 5 more Venezuelan nationals to the OFAC, Office of Foreign Assets Control, blacklist, freezing their U.S.-held assets. Senators from Florida and Texas called for stricter private jet surveillance and real-time reporting of foreign-registered aircraft arrivals. Meanwhile, Dubai-based gold refineries, long accused of accepting undocumented bullion, received quiet warnings from U.S. diplomats: continue dealing with black-market gold, and your access to the global banking system could be suspended. But perhaps the most shocking turn came from Panama. Authorities there raided an upscale condo linked to one of the shell companies financing the Learjet flights. Inside, they found passports, SIM cards, fake ID printers, and several wigs and women's clothing in sealed suitcases. One suitcase contained a passport for a 22-year-old Venezuela. The trial of Pedro Gutierrez and Luis Figueroa began in federal court in Miami just 6 weeks after their arrest, an unusually fast timeline driven by the political pressure and international heat surrounding the case. But from the start, their defense strategy was bold: deny knowledge, blame external handlers, and claim diplomatic harassment. Pedro's lawyer argued he was just the pilot, paid to fly the plane and unaware of any hidden compartments. He claimed he was not allowed to inspect the nose of the aircraft due to insurance limitations, a technicality that raised eyebrows but did create a small shadow of doubt. This led to explosive testimony from a protected witness, a 19-year-old Venezuelan woman named Valeria, who testified via video from an undisclosed location in Central America. Valeria had been recruited by a man linked to Luis's network under the promise of a modeling contract in Miami. Instead, she was fitted with a custom corset lined with gold bars, drugged for the flight, and instructed to behave like a flight attendant. Her tearful testimony dismantled the defense's narrative. What had initially looked like a high-end smuggling operation now bore the marks of modern-day trafficking, where women were expendable tools in a billion-dollar pipeline of gold and greed. Still, the jury saw through it. Pedro was convicted on conspiracy and customs fraud charges. Luis was found guilty of smuggling, money laundering, and human trafficking conspiracy. Both were sentenced to 18 and 27 years in federal prison, respectively. But the story didn't end with the gavel. Just days after the verdict, U.S. authorities announced warrants for 11 more individuals, spanning 3 countries and 2 continents. The smuggling ring had been dented, but far from dismantled. And as the investigation continued, agents found troubling signs that a new shipment was already en route, with another unknown face playing the next pawn in a game of glittering deception. Despite the successful prosecution of Pedro and Luis, federal investigators were haunted by what they couldn't pin down. For one, the gold's exact origin remained murky. Lab tests confirmed its chemical signature matched gold mined in southern Venezuela, but no serial numbers, mine stamps, or export documents were ever located. This pointed to illegal, wildcat mining zones, areas run by armed groups like the Tren de Aragua and ELN guerrillas, where no government oversight exists, and where enslaved labor, child workers, and environmental destruction are the norm. Then there was the issue of the jet's true ownership. Officially, the Learjet was registered under a Panamanian firm named Aurelia Logistics Incorporated, a shell corporation with no employees, no website, and no revenue history. But deeper analysis revealed a paper trail through 3 layers of holding companies, ultimately connecting back to a wealthy businessman in the United Arab Emirates with ties to international gold trade forums. The U.S. issued a sealed indictment for this individual, but with no extradition treaty in place, the chances of prosecution were slim. The masterminds were still free, and likely already adjusting their methods. Even more disturbing were unanswered questions about U.S.-based collaborators. Customs agents suspected at least 2 South Florida jewelry dealers were knowingly buying undocumented gold. However, proving their knowledge in court was difficult. None of the bars had distinguishing features once melted down, and sales were often cash-based. Then came the intelligence leak. A classified memo from Interpol suggested that a similar smuggling method had recently been used in Spain, involving a young woman flying from Venezuela to Madrid with gold sewn into her undergarments. Though not directly linked to the Fort Lauderdale crew, it mirrored the strategy. The implication was clear: this was a network, not a one-off op. Finally, Valeria, the witness who helped expose the human trafficking.